Hello, this is Dr. Orlando Lanyami again, and we are studying the second week of the Live Sound and Sound Studio course here at the Master of Sonic Arts, University of Rome Tor Vergata. After discussing the room acoustics, now we are going to discuss the sound sources. Before we even study the microphones and how to mic them, we need to understand how the sound sources actually sound. There are several types of musical ensembles that we can consider and record, from solo instruments to duos, such as violin sonatas, which is, for example, for violin and piano, trios, string quartets, brass quintets, and chamber music, chamber orchestras that we consider when we have 10 or more instruments. This table shows the difference in instrumentation between a late 18th century orchestra to the late 19th century. You can see that it grew actually quite a bit in terms of number of instruments. The orchestra of the late 19th century is the one that more or less we still use today, and of course, depending on the period of music that we are playing, we use the other ones as well. This is very important for us to have as a reference. When recording large orchestras such as this one that we see in this picture, it's important to have an idea of the instrumentation, how it is distributed. We have also always the string instruments in the front, the woodwinds, percussion and brass, of course, is always in the back because they are the loudest ones. But when we have choir organ, they also are in the back, not because they are so loud, because of course voices are not as loud, but a very large choir can be very loud, so it is all the way in the back of the group. The seating for the string instruments sometimes is a little different depending on what we are using. So, for example, the American system you see in the top has the violins in the left and the cellos on the right, so you have a difference in the frequency. But some other systems, such as the German and Furtwängler, which is who was one of the greatest conductors of the 20th century, he used to actually have a different distribution of the string instruments. Here we see the common configurations for the woodwind instruments in the orchestra, also the string quartets, two different configurations, and seating arrangements for other things such as winds and piano, and violin and piano, when we have a piano trio or a singer and so on. We studied before in acoustics and psychoacoustics the ADSR, the attack, decay, sustain, and release, which is the envelope of a sound. In a real situation, we have something similar to this in many cases. We have the attack, a quasi-stationary condition, which is, not always, it's a straight line, and the decay all the way in the end. It is extremely important for us to know that the attack of the musical instruments is completely different. For example, we can start from the percussion, which obviously has the very short attack, which is things that can be as short as 1 millisecond in there. And when we go down, from the plucked strings and the piano and then the woodwinds and brass and so on, all the way to the brass and the string soft attacks in the bottom that go all as long as 450 milliseconds. So this is extremely important that we know this and we're aware of this while recording these instruments. The other important component will be the harmonics. What you see on the right is actually what we call the Fourier transform, which is the levels of the harmonics. So, for example, a sine wave has no harmonics, so it has only one little line in there. But when we have more complex waves like we've seen there, we have different configurations of the harmonics or the spectrum of that particular sound. An extremely important characteristic of the musical instruments or any sound source for that matter is the formants. This is a area of frequency, a region of frequency that the instrument is more pronounced. So no matter where the instrument is actually playing in terms of the range of the instrument, those areas, those ranges are a little more pronounced. And this is very important for the timbre of the instrument and for us when we are going to EQ or record a particular instrument. This is a table that shows just briefly an overview of the formats of the different instruments. You know already the concept of dynamic range, which is the difference between the softest and the loudest sound in a particular program. Of course, instruments also have this. They have their differences. So, for example, a fortissimo or a pianissimo in a particular instrument is completely different from the other instrument. A flute or a violin, they are much quieter than, for example, a trumpet or trombone. And we also have below that level the room tone. Of course, microphones also have dynamic range, and when we combine all that with the equipment that we are using, we have a system dynamic range and the program dynamic range that can be much lower than all of those things individually. We have to combine all of those dynamic ranges to come up with our program dynamic range in the end. You also know from your studies in psychoacoustics that we have the equal loudness contours, that for us, in order to listen to some sounds with the same intensity, okay, the loudness, which is a psychological and physiological perception of the sound, we sometimes need to play a particular sound stronger with a higher SPL in order to have the same sensation of loudness. Since we are all musicians here, this is not there's nothing new in here, that we can have very soft sounds that we call pianissimo. We can use 2 Ps, 3 Ps, or even more than that. Some composers use in the 20th century, and so on. And also the loudest ones, which are the fortissimo and fortissimo, which are very loud and can have even more than 3 Fs. This is very important for us to be aware of the score that we are recording. Talking about dynamic range of instruments, it's very interesting to realize here in this slide is that the string instruments, for example, they have a very consistent dynamic range throughout the range. But when we see the other instruments, it's not exactly the same. The wind instruments, they are completely different. For example, if you see all the way in the bottom, the clarinet. It has very different dynamic ranges according to the range of frequencies. So, for example, in the 1 kilohertz, it has a very large dynamic range, which is not the same in the other two sides. For your reference here, there is the difference in the range of frequencies of all the string instruments. In addition to the frequency and the amplitude and all that we've been discussing, it's extremely important to know the radiating characteristics of the instruments. And this is what we are going to see now in the next couple of slides. So this is the strings, for example. You see the violin, just to give an example, how in the 800 hertz it has a radiation that is very large in all of the directions. But when we go higher, in the mid-range, it actually is a little smaller towards the right, which is kind of obvious. And then a little higher, it opens up again. So you see that the range of frequencies changes completely the radiating characteristics. And you see there, the cello, we have two different perspectives. And this will be extremely important for us in order to mic those instruments correctly. Continuing, we have the woodwind range of frequencies here, and as well the woodwind instruments radiation. And this is very important because you see, for example, the flute changes dramatically how it sounds in the low frequencies all the way to the high frequencies. Similarly, now we have the brass frequency spectrum that you can use as a reference, and the brass radiation characteristics that, as you can see, changes dramatically according to the different region of frequencies. When we talk about percussion instruments, it's a little more complicated because we have so many different ones. The ones that have the fast attack and the ones that have specific pitch. We can recognize the pitch, such as the timpani and the xylophone, but we also have snare drums and bass drums that don't have any specific pitch, although they do have ranges of frequencies. So this is a reference for you in terms of the percussion instruments. Here we can see the difference in the dynamic range of different percussion instruments. And here we see the piano radiation characteristics. And obviously, it's very clear there that when we go to the high end, the radiation shortens in terms of the angle in both directions, seeing from the front or seeing from the top. So this will change completely how we mic and we perceive the sounds from the piano. For the speaking voice, talking about the speaking voice to have an idea how that works, we see in average, I'm looking here, at the numbers at the book, that a man can go from softer speech at 60 dB all the way to 76 dB, the loud speech, which is a dynamic range around 16 dB. For women, it starts at 58 and goes to 68, which is around 10 dB. So of course all this information it's a lot of information actually together, but you need to realize that we need to be aware of all of those things. And by using that in the experience in the studio and the live sound, we will be able to have all that in our minds when we do our job, and we will do our job way better by knowing those things.